Tampering. Any part of doping control. Notice that term, doping control. We said there's a specific sequence of events that have to be monitored at every point along the way when a drug sample is collected, analyzed, and the results returned. That's called doping control. Trafficking, administration, attempting to administer, all of these are considered doping. Well, what are the drugs that are involved? Well, I'll show you some of the websites you can go to if you really want to see the whole list of drugs that are involved. But basically, there are three categories of drugs. One are drugs that are prohibited at all times. You are found to have this drug in your system, either through a blood test or urine test, it's considered that you have been doped. Anabolic androgenic agents, any type. There's a whole list of them that you can see. Peptide hormones, mimetics, analogs, growth hormone. That's a big one among athletes because they feel it can't be detected. Well, it sure can be detected. And analogs of these, by the way, synthetic analogs. You say, well, I'll just replace an amino acid here and it won't detect it. Those are covered. Notice even insulin is covered. Well, you say, what do you do if you're a diabetic? Well, you have to report that. You can compete if you are on insulin. It's just that the IOC and the agencies that oversee the drug testing need to be aware of it. EPO, erythropoietin, beta-2 agonists, that's an interesting one. Because beta-2 agonists, used for asthma, things like that. A lot of athletes are on beta-2 agonists, albuterol and the like. Those also have an anabolic effect as a side effect. And so athletes in the past have been known to use beta-2 agonists, even though they don't have asthma or have a need for it medically. They have been abusing it for athletic performance because of its cheap way to get an anabolic effect without using steroids. Antiestrogens, tamoxifen, for example, is prohibited. Why? Because antiestrogens and aromatase inhibitors that block the effects of estrogen raise androgen levels. Remember, androgens are synthesized before estrogens in the body. Masking agents, diuretics. Athletes might use diuretics to try to get rid of the drug. But traces can still be found by various techniques. Probenecid, to try to prevent the drug from appearing in the urine. These are so-called masking agents. Then we have a group, the first group prohibited anytime, in competition, out of competition, doesn't matter. Then we have a group that's prohibited in competition. So for such a period of time prior to competition and during competition and perhaps somewhat, I'm not sure about after competition. But certain drugs are prohibited, like cocaine. I guess you can be a coke addict, but don't use cocaine or amphetamine just before the race. Or narcotics, marijuana, glucocorticoids. And then we have a group that's prohibited only in certain sports. It's okay, I guess, if you use them in other sports like alcohol. Interestingly enough, alcohol is not prohibited in most sports. And I guess that's because alcohol is so pervasive that how are you going to stop somebody from having a beer or something like that, or toasting with wine or something, just prior to competition. But alcohol is prohibited in sports like archery, shooting. There have been instances where what do you call that? Biathlon? Is that the one where you shoot and you ski? Biathletes are prohibited from using alcohol, for example, archers, because they might be able to say, well, I use alcohol to calm my nerves, so you don't, and the same thing with beta blockers, which prevent tremors. That's a no-no in certain sports like that. Methods. All kinds of methods that one could use in doping, some of which are specifically prohibited, like enhancing oxygen transfer, like blood doping, where you take say about a month or two before a competition, you take maybe a unit of blood, 500 milliliters of your own blood, store it, and then work up your RBC count, and then add either more RBCs to your blood that's stored and put it back so you've got a high oxygen carrying capacity in your blood. It's called blood doping. That's prohibited. EPO, obviously prohibited. You know, the physiology of erythropoietin. Catheterization, urine substitution. Catheterization, that used to be a great one among the Russian athletes, where their trainers, they would give them drugs, and then just before they were being tested have their urine tested, they would catheterize their athletes so that the urine containing the drug would be taken. You get the picture. So then they would drink a lot of water, and the water would dilute the urine, and they wouldn't take the drug. Gene doping. The sports world is now trying to keep ahead of the game. In fact, I've given you an article that appeared in Science a couple of years ago that gives you pretty much an overview of gene doping and how it could be used in athletic competition to give athletes an advantage. One example, I can't remember if it's pointed out in this article or not, but there's an example of a Norwegian family of champion skiers. And it's no coincidence that these champion skiers, because there's a genetic, I don't know what gene it is, but that they have perhaps an amplification of a particular gene that it's believed provides them with that advantage. Now that's natural. They're not doping, but that occurs naturally within their family. But then there's concern that if it's discovered what gene it is that provides greater muscle mass or visual acuity, for example, whatever it is, if one could amplify that gene doping, or inserting a gene in place of the wild-type gene, then they want to stay ahead of the game. So that's what that article is all about, futuristic. But it's really here, because there are examples. Drug testing. Should we take a break?